What was the thinking and inspiration behind the idea for a climate museum in New York City?
So the Climate Museum was founded by our current director, Miranda Massey, and she was a former civil rights litigator. And there was a moment of inspiration after Hurricane Sandy, which she was living in New York. She lived through it. Basically, all of these ideas came together where if we don't have a safe environment to thrive in, then nothing else really matters. Nothing else can fall into place if our environment is at risk. And so she started to see environmental justice as a civil rights issue, connecting it back to her original work. And so the story is she thought of this idea of the Climate Museum thinking that she heard of it somewhere else, like someone had to have started it. This has to exist somewhere. And it didn't exist. It didn't exist in the US, I should say. There are like different climate museums around the world. It became her mission to get it in New York City, to make it publicly accessible, both in the knowledge sense and in the like transportation sense. We eventually want to have a permanent year-round location in a accessible place where people from all over New York City can come visit.
Now, you blended artistic expression with scientific facts about the climate change and the crisis we face. So what was the impact of that combination?
Well, combining the science side, I'll add in the history side, and the art side allows us we basically use art as a tool to create an entry point for people. We allow it to open up the conversation for people to just respond emotionally and to respond based on their own lived experiences. So it makes it really easy to connect with people on a very personal level rather than just throwing graphs and data at them, which we know doesn't work to elicit strong responses in people, to elicit action, which is what we're trying to do with what we do. We combine the science and the art and the history and all of this context in order to guide people to actions that they can take, actions that we can all take together in a civic and collective format to do something about climate change. We have also found that we need the very specific action directive. We felt like we created this concept of the action center in a previous exhibition a couple of years ago, and now we put it with basically every program that we do, because we realize the art has the power to create this strong emotion, and now we need to channel that emotion into the action through these very specific directives that we can help people with.
And what lessons did you learn from that particular approach?
We basically learned that people are really hungry for this kind of content. We've learned that there's what we call a supermajority of support for climate action, for climate policy. We've basically realized that everyone is on the same page. Everyone is worried about climate change. Everyone wants something to be done. But because of this weird, doomy, stifled feeling, we all stay really silent about it. And that just creates a cycle of pessimism, essentially. It's kind of like, oh, well, other people don't care about this. So, what can I do? What am I going to do? And really, we've found, based on research too, we've found that the first most basic action that you can take to do something about climate change is to start talking about it, because then you start realizing there are so many other people who care about this. There are so many other people who want to be engaged on this issue, who are looking for ways to get involved, and that momentum can be put towards, like I said, these civic and collective actions, like writing your representatives, like voting for people who want climate policy, like getting involved in your community and supporting local organizations that are already doing the work on climate justice. So we really found that our exhibition bring people together.
My sense is that you blended this heavy content with also a spirit of hopefulness. Would you talk about that?
I guess I can talk about, in the context of the end of fossil fuel, this reminds me of the mural that we had in the back on the back wall. We commissioned a mural by this artist named R. Gregory Christie. It's called Making Tomorrow. He basically split this mural into three pieces, like the past, the the present, and the future. And the past shows essentially the history of how we got here, the Industrial Revolution, the unjust, the racist system that are the core of climate change, that are the core of how fossil fuel emissions have created climate change. The middle is this fight back, this desire for change. It shows people like protesting and dealing with all of this challenging information. And then the third side of the mural that we liked to focus on a lot in our tours was the future, that was the potential for something better. This idea of like, yeah, we need to acknowledge our past and all of these problems that got us here. By doing that, we are able to create better solutions. We are able to imagine better futures. Once we can visualize what a climate safe or climate just future is. And so in our tours, for example, we would kind of like show people the progress of this mural and then spend time at the end of like, what does this actually look like? What does a climate just and climate safe future actually look like? The show is called The End of Fossil Fuels. So it's basically like deep decarbonization. We turn away from fossil fuels and we rely on clean energy. We rely on community solutions, community-oriented solutions, and there is policy that, climate just policy that protects us from climate change. And so having the space to start that conversation for people has also been really helpful.
In that context, there was an opportunity for the public to leave comments, to give you input. What sort of themes were struck?
That's a good question. It was basically like different variations of feeling seen, I think. It's kind of like hope is a general way to put it. People, like whether they're looking at the artwork or whether they're looking at the other types of content on the wall, they find places to connect to their own personal experiences, whether it's like, oh, there's a story about Arizona here. I used to live in Arizona and it was really, really hot. I remember that. Or I remember, I used to, like, I have family who lives in Cancer Alley in Louisiana. So there would be these different conversations of people inserting themselves. And then when you got to the point at the end of the exhibition in the Action Center where you leave your comments, there was a lot of like, I feel enlivened, I feel hopeful, I feel, empowered. I feel one of my favorite comments from the show was something like, I feel at home. I feel like this is a place that I didn't know that I needed. So there's that like really, we're talking about climate change, but there's also this really basic emotional connection that happens, and it allows people to feel something different when it comes to climate change, which is really what we want. We really want people to feel engaged and ready to do something about it in a positive way.
And you've been working at the Climate Museum for the past 6 years. What effect has this had on you?
Yeah, it's been a great journey. And it's funny to think about how my story is very similar to a lot of our audience, because I was working in the arts. I was kind of like, I don't know. I feel a little bit, there are so many things going on in the world. I feel like I could be doing more. What do I do? And I was to the point where I was like, I think I have to go back to school to study climate change because I'm so worried about it. Like, I need to know climate science in order to do something about it. And as soon as I started school again, I was like, oh, we know the science. There are these other barriers. There are these political and social and economic barriers to why we haven't done anything about climate change. And that really helped me understand, like, you don't have to be a climate scientist to act on climate change to get involved. You don't have to be an expert to get involved. Everyone comes from their own personal experience, and no matter what that is, there's a way to tie it into climate change and how you can like bring people together to kind of get engaged on this issue together. I like when this question comes up because I feel like it can relate to a lot of people of like, I was so worried about it too. I was looking for a way to engage, and I found the museum, and it has helped me basically understand climate change as an issue differently and better, and kind of understand the human aspect of like, what do we need to do? How do we mobilize each other? How can we work together?
And what would you suggest to other entities, whether they're groups, municipalities, governments, who are contemplating doing something similar as your organization has had? What should they consider? What are those important elements?
We talk about how the arts and culture are such an important tool to tackle climate change. I like to explain it to people like, we need every tool in the toolbox. So arts and culture are super valuable as a part of, the collage of things that we could be doing. We tell people that museums um, basically have these superpowers because they're super popular, they're super trusted by the public, and they're spaces for emotional vulnerability and connection, essentially. So all of those things together makes it really popular. It makes it a really powerful tool to address social issues of all kinds, but specifically climate change in this context. And there's a lot of really strong research being done on like the potential of museums to insert this climate conversation, and how are they doing it to essentially put that public trust to good use and kind of change what is happening. From our perspective, it would be really important to absolutely build in the justice aspect of not just teaching about climate science, but teaching about climate justice. And then we also think it's really important to have this action aspect that we talked about. You can't just build up these emotions in people and then like not have an outlet for them to do something about it, because there's by the time they've seen a show like this, they're so ready, they want to do something. And so we are really excited for the potential of like more projects like this to pop up. We would be really excited for this to become a type of cultural transformation. Miranda jokes a lot about like we were the first climate museum in the US, but it should be like climate museum Nashville, climate museum Chicago, climate museum that, so we're excited by that potential.
And what is the current status of the Climate Museum in New York City?
So we just closed the end of fossil fuel. We are working towards a permanent year-round location. We've functioned on a pop-up model for the past few years. We shut down this past show. We're trying to figure out our next show, but it's kind of too early to say where and when it will be. We're trying to collaborate with other organizations and other museums to bring little collaborative exhibitions to their spaces. But for now, it's kind of it's a little bit of an in-between period for us because we just closed the show and we're working towards our next show, and we're working towards a permanent location.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.